What's up everyone, Tom here with another video. Today we'll be talking about Warren Buffett. His company just reported and we are seeing a clear trend. Buffett is starting to buy again. So what is he buying? Stay tuned. So in this video, we'll be covering the stock that he's purchasing, some of the stocks that he's sold and purchased during this crisis, and some levels that you could be looking at from a technical analysis approach on this particular stock right now. I think the best place to start is, of course, to discuss some of these sold stocks and purchased stocks over the last couple of quarters. So Warren Buffett is, of course, well known for his sales of the airlines during the crisis. A lot of people kind of picked a bit of fun at Buffett for this, but realistically, he sees a greater picture of long-term suffering for the airlines through this crisis. He just doesn't see things going back to their norm. Another thing that he was doing was he was selling off things like Wells Fargo. At the same time, he's been purchasing recently Bank of America. So this is his favorite bank and he's always purchasing a huge amount of this stock. He's now purchased $2 billion worth of the stock over the last few weeks. Another big notable was his purchase of Dominion Energy DE for around $10 billion during the Q2 report. So what about Warren Buffett's stock earnings? Well, they came in where we have an operating income falling of 10% to $5.51 billion, and Berkshire booked a $10 billion charge on Precision Castparts, which of course it is exposed to the aviation sector. No real surprises there. Some things were doing well, some things weren't doing well. Berkshire Hathaway has a tendency to kind of run very similarly to the S&P 500 as a whole. So it's one of those stocks that's very well diversified and very defensive. Notably, Buffett has quite a few big holdings. One of those that everyone always talks about is, of course, his holding in Apple, which of the personal amounts of money is weighted at around 35.52% of his total holdings. On top of that, we have Bank of America, of course, he's been purchasing into his well-known position in Coca-Cola, American Express, and one notable that he does have and is doing well right now, although it is quite small, is Amazon.com. Of course, a stock that has performed very well during this crisis. So what is Buffett buying? Well, it turns out that Buffett is actually backing himself. He is boosting buybacks and they are purchasing Berkshire shares. And this is a good thing if you're a Berkshire holder or a good thing if you're looking to invest long-term with Buffett. So you can see on this chart here, his purchasing or buybacks over the years from 2018 to now. And it's clear to see that there's been a trend even coming into this crisis of him backing himself. But more importantly, he went up to $5.1 billion of purchases during the Q2 period. Obviously, he was seeing value in his own companies, and I don't blame him for this. I think this is a good move for Buffett, backing himself, backing his companies. What do the analysts think, though? Well, the analysts have a one-year target on Berkshire before this particular release result of $217. When we look at the 52 kind of week range, we can see it went down to around $160 during the crisis, and before the crisis, it went as high as $231. So are we still under right now where it went to during its peak? We certainly are. And still partially lagging behind that S&P 500, which could make it a good opportunity for you as an investor or trader to look at Buffett shares. We'll be looking at the technical analysis in just a minute, and I'll show you some of the key levels that from a technical analysis perspective do make sense. So what about some of the key fundamentals? What about earnings per share? What are the expectations for Buffett? Well, because of this crisis, some fundamentals don't necessarily make sense. One of them, though, is the forward PE. So the forward expectation of this company is 19.22. I couldn't pull a report on Berkshire B for you, but I pulled a report here on Berkshire A just to show everybody this particular thing down here. And this is the 5-year average of course, price to earnings ratios. So here we have the Berkshire generally trades around 20 times earnings. Now we're in a new paradigm. Many people are thinking that we're going to a point where PE is going to be higher than ever before. but it's clear to think that this company is still potentially decent value at these levels. Our forward PE is around the right price for the 5-year average, and if it continues to grow at the standard pace, then it still could be a great company. We can see here that it gets way higher during some periods, and often when it gets this high and it gets this far away from the average, is not usually a great time to invest in these shares. And I think that will show in the technical analysis as well when you look at it. What other notables are there on the fundamentals? Well, of course, there's earnings per share. There's all these other things that you can look at. But realistically, during this crisis, the best thing to do is to make sure that these companies have decent cash flow. And of course, Berkshire Hathaway certainly does. Is it going to go into problems with cash flow? It is not. And that's one of the biggest things that you want to be looking for when it comes to a crisis stock. Can it afford to stay open? Can it afford to run? Does it need, of course, Fed money? Right now, cash flow is not necessarily being looked at as much, but I do think one day you won't have the Fed necessarily backing every stock. So make sure that you do the due diligence when you're getting into these kind of shares. So what about Berkshire Hathaway from a technical analysis perspective? Is there still value here? Is there potential problems here? Well, one thing about Buffett's stock is it hasn't really returned that well since 2018. So you can see here it was $215 in 2018, and it's actually less than that now. So there's been a few years of stagnation in terms of Berkshire Hathaway shares. We use a top-down approach here when we talk about technical analysis, where we go from the monthly into the weekly into the daily and figure out all the key levels. So if that's something that interests you, please remember to subscribe and, of course, hit that alert button. Let's get into it now and talk about some of the notable areas that I'm seeing. So on the monthly, of course, you're going to want to draw your key resistance points and key support points. So we have a key kind of resistance up here, but what I would be doing is actually bringing it slightly down. I'd be looking more at where these body closes happened before even the crisis, so around this kind of 220 area. The reason I'd be doing that is because I think when we go into the smaller time frames, this may make some sense. Like 220 is going to be a key psychological for this share. Another thing that's notable, of course, we have our lows that have been set in here. And notice how the share comes down almost and hits this previous 150. If we saw a little bit of further selling, this would have been a very strong buy zone. There would have been a lot of purchasing there. There was the previous support over here, but this would still have been an incredible buy zone. So on the monthly, not much to note. Obviously, it's looking bullish. It's busted past this shooting star kind of negative candle, and both of these put together would actually be a long leg doji. So it's not too much to worry about there, but I'm starting to see some things that I will show you on the weekly. So we go down to the weekly, and this is where it gets key. 200 psychological level has been broken. So this 200 psychological level has been smashed through. It was acting as resistance. It kind of just got above it and then quickly sold back off. But this weekly has closed well above the 200. So if we're looking for dips, if we're looking for opportunities in a stock like this, it's clear to see that 200 acted as support previously over here on the left-hand side, and therefore could act as an area of support again now that we've broken through it. It is clearly being respected in the market, and that's important from a technical analysis perspective. We know the analysts have that higher target. They've got kind of that 217 to 220. We'll see what the upgrades come in at next week after this earnings report. But realistically, we are clear that this is a key zone on the weekly. Other notables were above the 50 exponential moving average, but really for now, they're the kind of key things I'm looking at for the weekly. Let's take a look now at the daily. What's happening on the daily? Well, here's where things get even more interesting. And I think this is a key thing to always be looking at in the market. We've got some very nice structure being formed on this share below the point. And this is something I mentioned about a month ago. So I'll just bring this support up here. And I'm only doing that because there was only one candle that got through. We'll call that the anomaly day. And everything else has been holding this level. We can see that when it first came down and started testing the zone, it found support very quickly at the 168. So that would be the key level down here. What else are we seeing about this chart? Well, we've got a very clear range. So we've got a nice range between the 200 where resistance has been found, and we've got that support. So you could almost think this structure is going to act as very good support, firstly, if it ever came back down, but even that the range here could be potentially lined out. So we could maybe get a trend line here, get the level, and then that could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If it is, and it goes back into the high, it kind of makes sense the market has been thinking about this. Also, let's think about what happened during this time. Well, there was a huge amount of selling and a huge amount of purchasing. And those two things together mean that there was a lot of accumulation during this period. So what's another thing I look at with the trading community here on the channel? Well, we always talk about dynamic support of key moving averages. So here we have the 200 simple moving average, the green line here, and the 20 exponential moving average, the red line here. And they're about to intersect as the market's moving higher. So what's some theoretical things that could happen over the next couple of weeks? Well, firstly, we might see the stock open higher and then potentially start to actually sell off after the hype of the pre-earnings report. It wears off and we see the stock kind of coming back to a bit of a norm. What might happen then is the stock might continue down to this 200 level that we've analyzed here, where previous resistance and support will act as support again. And at the same time, we might have the 20 moving average and the 200 moving average acting as dynamic support. And what does this create? Well, it creates a kind of super key level for us to be looking at as stock traders and stock investors. It's clear to think that we've got 220 and the 230 as potential take profits. If we're looking at holding it for a longer period of time, of course, you could be doing that as it's a great company and it's proven through track history that that's what's happening. And realistically, we could also be adding things like a fib. So let's say we had a Fibonacci, and Fibonacci is a great thing for everybody to be looking at. And we broke that down and had a look at these levels. Well, maybe something like this happens and we see a 38.2 or 23.6 fib at the same zone. Multiple technical analysis reasons for us to potentially be looking at that zone and that level. It's always important to never have FOMO whenever it comes to these things. So obviously Buffett believes in his company, and rightfully so he should, but that doesn't mean that we want to be buying it at every single price. You can use dollar cost averaging. It's a way of doing things, but realistically, another way is buying those dips, and the dips do eventually happen. If you've enjoyed this video today, please make sure to subscribe and of course hit that alert button. And I'm really appreciating the trading community for commenting and subscribing right now. Big thumbs up to everybody out there, and I hope you're having a great week and week ahead. See you in the next video. Bye for now.